The scene unfolds on a vast battlefield where a massive army stands with unwavering determination, marking the age of great war in a realm where strength alone defines law and truth as countless warriors clash and spill blood across the land. At the pinnacle of martial and military might stood Asura, the conqueror who had dominated the world through absolute power. As he faced the army alone, a commander mounted on horseback confronted him, calling him mad for coming this far just to throw his life away and questioning whether this was the purpose behind Asura's arrival. The commander further declared that even someone as powerful as Asura could not defeat an army of 100,000 soldiers by himself and demanded to know what scheme had brought him there alone. Asura showed no fear, calmly repeating the mention of 100,000 soldiers as if it meant nothing to him, dismissing such numbers as irrelevant and instead accusing the commander of relying on meaningless numerical advantage rather than true strength, which was why he would never be able to defeat Asura as long as he lived. Enraged by the insult, the commander accused Asura of having no honor and limitless arrogance before ordering his troops to kill him immediately. The army charged forward all at once, surrounding Asura, who stood motionless despite appearing unarmed and alone. When the assault reached him, Asura unleashed a single devastating attack forged from overwhelming martial mastery, an attack so powerful that it tore through the battlefield and annihilated the charging army, leaving none capable of resisting the destruction that followed. The devastating power of Asura's single attack shattered the landscape into countless fragments, leaving destruction stretching across the battlefield. Even the legendary masters who once dominated the era fell one after another before the overwhelming might of the man known as the strongest. In time, the world was unified under the banner of the Asura kingdom, marking the completion of his conquest over the heavens. The scene then shifted to Muon, the capital of the Asura kingdom, where towering structures rose majestically across the land while the kingdom's scenery radiated beauty and grandeur. Within the city, a group of people bowed their heads in reverence as they celebrated their sovereign's achievement. At that moment, a silver-haired woman named Imowul spoke, remarking that with the Lord's victory over countless enemies and the unification of the Central Plains, there was nothing left in the world to fear. Asura turned his gaze toward her with a menacing expression, calling her name before coldly demanding to know her purpose for summoning him. Imowul stated that Asura was the only king in history to unify the Central Plains solely through martial strength, and that even the title of martial god would be insufficient to describe the world's greatest fist king. To match his unparalleled prestige, she revealed that she wished to present him with a secret martial manual, explaining that he had been brought there specifically for that reason. She further claimed that only Asura possessed the ability to control the immense power hidden within the manual. In the center of the hall, a golden cup filled with a crimson liquid was displayed. Asura's curiosity was stirred by the mention of the secret manual, and he slowly reached toward the golden cup. As he did so, the red fluid inside began to swirl around his hand, and a single drop of his own blood fell into the vessel. In that instant, several steel chains erupted from the golden cup and surged toward Asura, rapidly wrapping around his arms and legs before he could react. The chains tightened around his body as Asura stared in surprise at the unexpected development, while Imowul declared that his era of tyranny would end there and that the Asura kingdom would soon fall under new rule. Imowul stated that it was futile for Asura to attempt escape, as even the strongest warrior would remain powerless before the infinite abyss. Asura remained silent, showing no reaction to her words, though Imowul continued and urged him to surrender immediately. However, the steel chains binding Asura suddenly began to fracture and break apart under his overwhelming strength. Asura called Imowul's name, questioning whether she had forgotten the identity of the man before her, declaring that he was the very embodiment of heaven's mandate and the force of destruction itself. Alarmed by the sudden turn of events, Imowul turned toward her subordinates and demanded that the barrier of the infinite abyss be activated without delay. At that same moment, Asura gathered his power and prepared a fist strike meant to annihilate Imowul, only to find crimson fluid once again surging around and constricting his body. Asura was momentarily stunned as the red fluid restrained him, preventing his attack when victory had been mere inches away. A magical circle then formed beneath his feet and began pulling him downward with immense force as he struggled to break free from its pull. A red beam of light erupted outward, and when it vanished, Asura was no longer present, having been dragged into the unknown depths beyond. Imowul stood motionless, gazing at the fading magic circle etched into the ground while her subordinates also remained still, saying nothing. After several moments of silence, the subordinates knelt before Imowul and bowed their heads, acknowledging her as their lord and celebrating her rise as the new queen of the Asura kingdom. Imowul simply stood there in quiet satisfaction, observing the outcome without speaking. Just like that, the life of the Fist King Asura, who once ruled the world, came to a hollow and empty end. At the same moment, a system notification appeared before a young man, informing him that he had been summoned as a player and asking whether he wished to join. No response came, which confused the system, prompting it to urge the player to press the accept button quickly. However, a powerful fist suddenly struck the notification screen, shattering and cracking the system interface. The young man stood there looking bewildered, unsure of what had just occurred while feeling an overwhelming and ominous energy surrounding him. At that moment, a voice called out to him, warning him to be careful as a massive red dragon charged directly toward Yuda. Reacting quickly, Yuda drew his sword and used it to block the incoming attack, though the impact was so powerful that he was pushed backward. The red dragon then unleashed its Inferno Breath, a devastating attack that required a 2-second charging time before firing a massive beam of destructive fire. Yuda was surprised by the sudden assault as another system notification appeared, identifying the Inferno Breath skill as activated while a combat analysis program, labeled as Climber Strategy, began evaluating the attack. Once the analysis was complete, Yuda prepared himself to counter the skill as the system automatically initiated the countermeasure. Gripping his sword tightly, Yuda cleaved the dragon's attack into 2 separate halves before launching himself high into the air and activating the powerful Heavenly Judgment skill against the dragon. As the skill was used, a notification appeared showing that Heavenly Judgment still had 9 remaining uses. The dragon's body was struck repeatedly across multiple locations before exploding into fragments, and the system announced that the quest had been completed with Yuda's victory over the 998 floor boss known as Inferno Balrog. The final quest then appeared, instructing him to reach the top of the tower and achieve complete conquest. Yuda stared at the dragon's disintegrating body and muttered that the battle had been extremely close. At that moment, a small floating girl asked Yuda what was wrong, noticing that he had spaced out earlier, and reminded him that only the top floor of the tower remained. She urged him to hurry so they could finish the tower conquest and return to see their families. Yuda agreed, stating that they had to clear the tower no matter what. It had already been 3 years since Yuda was summoned to this world, and during that time he had focused solely on one objective, reaching the top of the tower. Now that only the final stage remained, an unfamiliar sense of uneasiness lingered in his heart, though he could not determine its source. While lost in thought, the small girl called out to him again, asking if something was wrong. Placing his hands against the massive door before him, Yuda forced himself to remain composed, reminding himself that he had come too far to allow doubt to consume him. The girl asked once more if he was truly fine, and Yuda answered that he was, adding that they should proceed inside. He believed that whatever awaited him at the final stage could not surpass his current statistics, and he was determined to return to his original world once everything was finished. However, the entity that appeared before his eyes for a brief moment was something so terrifying that it felt overwhelming, though it quickly changed into the form of an old man, none other than Asura himself. Asura looked at Yuda and asked who he was, while Yuda, equally confused by the situation, questioned the presence of a random old man in such a place. Yuda wondered if the elderly man standing before him was the final boss. Asura glanced around the surroundings, wondering where he had been trapped, and concluded that Imowul had truly sealed him inside this place. Hearing the man speak, Yuda judged him to be an opponent of exceptional intelligence and immediately drew his weapon, deciding not to underestimate him simply because of his human appearance, since regardless of outward form, the being standing before him was the final monster guarding the end of the tower. Without wasting any time, Yuda charged directly toward Asura, intending to end the battle quickly and decisively from the very beginning. He believed that victory would be secured if he finished the fight immediately, but Asura evaded the attack with an almost imperceptibly small movement. Yuda did not stop his assault and immediately followed up with another strike aimed directly at Asura, landing a powerful blow, yet Asura remained completely unmoved. Yuda then launched a downward attack from above, declaring internally that this would be the end, and activated the Heavenly Judgment skill to strike Asura directly. A system notification appeared, indicating that only 8 uses of Heavenly Judgment remained. After landing the attack, Yuda briefly believed that the final boss was far weaker than he had expected, but at that moment Asura spoke, addressing him as a brat and questioning his actions. Yuda was shocked to see that the entity before him was still standing without even a single scratch, having blocked his ultimate skill with just one hand. Yuda pulled his weapon back, causing Asura to release his grip on the weapon he was holding. Yuda then acknowledged that this level of power was expected from the final boss. Activating the climber's strategy guide, Yuda waited as the analytical program completed its assessment, eventually displaying a victory probability of approximately 87.86%. Meanwhile, Asura continued blocking the attacks calmly. At that moment, Asura spoke, ordering Yuda to stop, and the system interface immediately began displaying error messages while updating the battle prediction, drastically reducing the calculated success rate to 0.43%. Yuda was shocked to see that the success rate had fallen below 1%, realizing that he had never before encountered an enemy of such overwhelming strength. He questioned inwardly the identity of the old man standing before him. Asura then spoke, telling Yuda not to be afraid, explaining that he did not engage in battle with opponents he deemed unworthy of fighting. Yuda was startled to hear that he was considered unworthy of combat. Asura further stated that with Yuda's current level of skill, even a single punch from him would be wasted. Wearing a serious expression, Asura then asked Yuda about the nature of this place. Hearing those words, Yuda smirked, believing that he had finally understood why neither Heavenly Judgment nor the Climber Strategy Guide had worked. He concluded that the stage itself required him to prove his true strength before he could inflict meaningful damage, and he burst in a loud laughter as he realized that a hidden mechanism had been placed within the trial. Yuda continued explaining that only by demonstrating his true worth could he deal damage, and that this was the core rule governing the stage. Preparing himself, Yuda activated his trait skill, temporarily raising all of his statistics to their maximum limits, before charging toward Asura and declaring internally that he would unleash the absolute peak power granted by the system's stat enhancement. As Yuda drew closer, Asura observed a status window displaying Yuda's fully maximized statistics, and upon seeing it, he stated that Yuda should never have tried to discuss strength using such insignificant numerical values. Asura clenched his fist, remarking that measuring strength through a blue window filled with numbers was deeply contemptible. With a grave expression, Asura declared that he no longer cared about the nature of this place, and as he spoke, he began charging his own attack, stating internally that he would start by shattering Yuda's distorted perception of power before tearing everything apart to correct it. Yuda swung his weapon with all his remaining strength, while Asura mirrored the movement, announcing internally that he would first destroy the contemptible blue status window floating before him. The status interface instantly shattered into countless fragments under the force of the attack, and at the same time, Asura's strike sent Yuda flying backward at high speed. Yuda lay injured and stunned by the unexpected outcome, watching in shock as his own status window fractured and gradually faded while continuously displaying error messages indicating that the system had suffered critical damage. He was astonished that such an event was even possible, finding the situation completely absurd. The system interface then reported that all stored statistics were being erased, that data recovery attempts had failed, and that system shutdown was currently in progress. Standing tall, Asura asked Yuda if he now understood reality, declaring that true strength could not be quantified through numerical displays, and with a menacing smile he announced that the long and exhausting game of relying on numbers would end immediately. Yuda could only stare at Asura in stunned silence, and in that moment, his level was forcibly reset to level 1, leaving Kim Yuda overwhelmed and tearful as he uttered a single apology. 3 years earlier, Yuda had been summoned into a mysterious tower where he climbed alongside many companions, though he alone survived the journey. Sitting on the ground, Yuda called out to his flying companion Nova, asking whether returning to their original world would be possible if the tower were conquered. He expressed his growing unease the more he reflected on the situation, noting that they were being sent forward blindly without knowing what dangers awaited them, and he questioned whether climbing the tower was meaningful if nothing could be guaranteed. Nova agreed with Yuda's words, acknowledging that even if they succeeded in climbing the tower, returning to their original world might still be impossible. However, Nova reminded Yuda that Ashwa had told them that their chosen path carried meaning and that every journey they undertook was bound to have significance, assuring him that Yuda's journey would ultimately hold an important purpose. Returning to the present, Asura wore a menacing smile and declared internally that the exhausting game centered around numerical strength would end at that moment. Yuda lay on the ground in shock, slowly realizing that everything he had believed about himself, this world, and his purpose might have been fundamentally wrong. Panicking, Yuda attempted to summon his status window, inventory, and quest interface, but nothing responded, leaving only suffocating silence in their place. He could not accept that his stat window had truly vanished, repeatedly muttering the command to reboot the system within his mind while struggling to comprehend the impossibility of the situation. Observing Yuda's behavior, Asura dismissed it as pathetic, questioning whether Yuda was still trapped inside that distorted game of numerical power and stating that the repulsive blue windows would never appear again. Trembling in fear, Yuda pleaded for mercy. However, Asura repeated that he had no interest in killing someone who was not even worthy of being fought. Asura crouched down and demanded that Yuda answer his question about the nature of this place and what must be done to return to his original world. Yuda speculated that the man standing before him might also be a player, and he admitted that he himself did not know the method of returning home. Aside from clearing the final stage, no other known path existed. Asura questioned what Yuda meant by clearing the final stage, finding the explanation nonsensical. Hearing this, Yuda made a strange expression, briefly wondering whether the man before him had come from an era as distant as the Joseon period. After considering how best to explain the situation, Yuda simplified the explanation, stating that Asura's task was to clear the entire tower. Clearing the entire tower meant conquering every floor from the first to the topmost level without leaving a single stage uncleared. Looking troubled, Yuda added that if Asura was truly a player, he should begin completing quests slowly and systematically. Hearing this, Asura smiled confidently and declared internally that if that was the case, he would shatter the entire tower into pieces. Yuda was shocked upon hearing Asura's declaration and immediately told him that destroying the tower was not the correct meaning of clearing it. However, Asura paid no further attention and drove his fist into the tower floor, triggering a massive explosion that spread across every level of the structure. From the outside, it became visible that each floor of the tower was collapsing and disintegrating under the force of the attack, leaving Yuda stunned by what he was witnessing. As Yuda fell rapidly toward the lower floors, he angrily shouted at Asura, questioning why he was needlessly destroying an intact tower. At the same time, a red system notification appeared, reporting a critical error and confirming that the tower had been destroyed by an abnormal entity. As the explosions continued spreading through every level, Yuda struggled to comprehend the identity of the old man, finding it impossible to believe that the tower could be shattered using nothing but bare hands. While still falling, Nova suddenly called out to him and quickly rushed forward, grabbing the back of his collar just in time to prevent him from plummeting further toward the lowest depths. Feeling relieved, Yuda asked where Nova had been all this time, believing that she had disappeared. Nova apologized, explaining that she had been delayed because she went to retrieve Yuda's sword. More importantly, she warned that they needed to escape immediately because something far more dangerous was about to occur. Hearing this, Yuda questioned what Nova meant by something big, wondering what could possibly be worse than the current situation. At that moment, a purple system notification appeared, indicating that abnormal access had been detected and that all data related to the destroyed tower would be erased. As the message was displayed, a massive black hole materialized out of nowhere, beginning to absorb everything within its vicinity, including the collapsing tower debris. Yuda stared at the phenomenon, unable to identify what the black hole was, but instinctively understood that being pulled inside would be extremely dangerous. The system then reported that the storage space for discarded data was nearly full and that any information that could not be deleted would be forcibly released into the outside world. At that moment, Asura casually stomped on the black hole and stood atop it, as if the phenomenon did not exist, glancing downward and remarking internally that it felt like he had simply stepped on something insignificant, briefly wondering whether it was merely his imagination. He then changed the subject, questioning why nothing had happened and stating that, just as the brat had said, he had successfully cleared the tower. Yuda immediately shouted at Asura, insisting that this was not the correct meaning of clearing the tower. He further added that even for someone like a combat prodigy of Asura's level, the situation had gone too far, and he questioned whether Asura truly intended to continue destroying everything in sight. Yuda was about to warn that they did not know what catastrophic consequences might arise if the destruction continued. But at that moment, a purple beam of light erupted from the ground, expanding rapidly, as if preparing to summon a final boss-level entity. Yuda watched in shock as a voice echoed through the area, announcing that a successor had finally been found, though an uninvited intruder had also appeared. A woman then manifested before them, and Asura was visibly surprised upon recognizing her as Imowul, the same woman who had betrayed him and sent him into this unknown world. Wearing a confident expression, the woman asked whether Asura was the rude individual who had destroyed her tower. Gritting his teeth in fury, Asura charged directly toward Imowul, declaring internally that he had finally found her hiding place and was enraged by her betrayal. However, just as his attack was about to strike, the woman raised a single hand, releasing a powerful force that pinned Asura down while cracking the ground beneath him, prompting Yuda to call out Asura's name in alarm and concern. Maintaining control over Asura with her power, the woman repeated her question, asking whether Asura was indeed the one who had destroyed her tower. Observing the scene, Yuda concluded that it was impossible for the woman to have subdued the monstrous old man with a single blow, and he began to suspect that the woman standing before him might be Ashwa, the figure Nova had mentioned earlier. Asura dragged his hands across the ground as he slowly stood up, stating that the woman before him was different from the Emowool he had once known. He added that the Emowool he remembered had never possessed such strange and unfamiliar powers, and based on her manner of speech, it was clear that she was the true architect of the accursed tower. Smiling menacingly, Asura questioned whether the entire disgusting game built around numerical strength was her doing. He then shouted that he had followed everything they had demanded, clearing the cursed tower and destroying the hateful number-based system, and demanded that she immediately send him back to his original kingdom. The woman appeared briefly startled before bursting into loud laughter, finding Asura highly amusing, and asked who had given him the absurd notion that clearing the tower would guarantee a return to his original world. Hearing this, Yuda and Nova exchanged puzzled looks. The woman then declared that whether it was the tower itself or the status window system, Asura was free to destroy them as much as he wished. Raising her hand, she summoned a concentrated purple spherical energy and informed Asura that if he truly managed to obliterate everything she had created, she would send him back to the world he came from, though it would not be an easy task. At that moment, numerous players began appearing before Yuda, as the system reported that a portion of the discarded data stored in the trash bin space was being restored, resulting in the generation of artificial or dummy players. Yuda watched in shock as the bodies of his fallen comrades, players who had once died during the tower climb, began regenerating before his eyes, leaving him overwhelmed and questioning the reality of what was unfolding. With a menacing smile, the woman stated that the number of towers Asura had to destroy in the future was still far greater, implying that the challenges in this world were far from over. At that moment, the resurrected players began moving again, and one of them called out Yuda's name, startling him. The man urged Yuda to hurry and continue climbing the tower together. The woman then spoke, declaring that regardless of Asura's strength, the balance of the world would not collapse so easily. Overcome by rage, Yuda immediately gathered his energy and launched a powerful attack toward the woman without hesitation, though the strike proved useless as a defensive barrier blocked the assault completely. Seeing Yuda, the woman asked who the insignificant being attacking her was. Burning with anger, Yuda questioned the meaning of the situation, believing that his comrades had been dead. He insisted that the individuals before him were comrades who had risked their lives alongside him during the tower climb, and he was furious that they were being treated in such a manner. He further stated that this was the very reason she had brought them into the tower. As soon as he finished speaking, the woman raised her hand and activated her gravitational power, sending Yuda flying backward at high speed. The woman then explained that Yuda was merely a component required to complete her ideal world, adding that the world she had created remained unstable and could not exist without his power. This was the reason she had forced Yuda to climb the tower by assigning him fabricated missions disguised as quests. Yuda felt intense fury knowing that everything had been orchestrated solely for that purpose. The woman then declared that she had no more interest in dealing with someone who had lost all remaining power and announced that Yuda should vanish immediately. As the woman prepared to activate her attack, Yuda, with tears in his eyes, cursed the life he had lived, blaming himself for everything that had happened and regretting that he had never climbed the foolish tower in the first place. Burning with anger, he inwardly wished that he had been stronger and more intelligent, believing that if he had possessed greater power and wisdom, he could have defeated the woman. While consumed by such thoughts, the next scene unfolded, revealing one of the woman's arms flying through the air after being violently severed from her body, shocking her as she struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. A trail of destructive energy extended upward from Asura, indicating that he was the one who had launched the attack against the woman. The woman stood stunned by the sudden assault. Asura then approached Yuda and stated that Yuda had once again earned his respect. With a playful smile, Asura joked that the woman had been Asura's prey first before becoming Yuda's target. Yuda was surprised by the statement as Asura continued, acknowledging Yuda's courage, but emphasizing that it was still too early for him. Asura declared that he would personally take the woman's head, asserting that he alone would deliver the finishing blow. With those words, he charged forward and drove his fist into the woman's head, forcing her body toward the ground. As the dust settled, Asura was seen standing with his arm wrapped around the woman's neck. The woman showed no fear, maintaining a calm smile, while acknowledging that Asura was truly impressive for displaying such overwhelming strength without relying on any system support. However, She soon raised her hand and activated a spell, stating that she would not allow his power to run unchecked. Asura was confused by the sudden action and irritated by the woman's continued use of what he considered dishonest techniques. The woman pulled Asura's face closer to hers and told him that he should conquer every tower scattered across the world, promising that she would wait for him at the highest point of existence. The moment she finished speaking, the spell reached completion and she vanished from sight, leaving Asura standing alone while staring silently at the ground. At that moment, Asura recalled the words Imowul had once spoken, realizing that the woman's earlier statements carried the same meaning and tone as the one he had just heard. Rising slowly, Asura concluded that the woman's appearance and behavior strongly resembled Imowul's, though the reason behind it remained unclear. He stared into the distance, questioning why Imowul had sent him to such a world in the first place. Soon afterward, the resurrected players resumed their attacks against Yuda and Asura. Yuda stood uncertainly, unable to decide how to respond since the attackers were the comrades he once fought alongside. Yuda called out to one of his comrades, asking whether the man could no longer recognize him. But Nova warned Yuda that attempting to communicate was pointless. She explained that even if recognition remained, it was merely a residual reaction caused by fragmented memories from the restoration process. Despite hearing Nova's explanation, Yuda refused to accept that his comrades no longer recognized him. At that moment, Asura suddenly delivered a single, forceful punch directly into the face of one of Yuda's comrades, showing no hesitation or mercy, and demanded to know what Yuda was doing. Yuda was shocked by the ruthless manner in which Asura struck the resurrected man, while Asura dismissed the situation as a waste of time, insisting that there was no point in fighting meaningless trivialities and urging Yuda to quickly lead him toward the location of the remaining towers. Yuda asked Asura to pause for a moment, explaining that the people before him were his comrades and that he could not simply abandon them. However, Asura responded seriously by questioning whether the resurrected figures truly resembled comrades in Yuda's eyes. He stated that they were nothing more than vengeful spirits of the dead, and that regardless of Yuda's emotional attachment, the truth would not change. Asura then told Yuda that if he intended to remain entangled with these ghostly remnants, he could spend his entire life playing with wandering spirits, while Asura would proceed alone to hunt down the woman who had vanished. At that moment, several spirits attempted to attack Asura from behind, but he eliminated them in a single instant without showing any hesitation. Asura became irritated that such lowly ghosts would dare to obstruct his path, and decided to destroy them all at once since he was pressed for time. Drawing his fist backward with immense force, he unleashed a devastating punch, and for a brief moment, silence filled the battlefield. Asura immediately sensed that something was wrong because he could no longer feel any internal energy circulating within his body, leading him to suspect that his dantian had been sealed. Despite this, a menacing smile formed on his face as he found the situation increasingly interesting, realizing that they had dared to challenge Asura himself. He remained confident that no matter what the woman had done, she would not be able to stop him. As the spirits attempted another assault, Asura declared internally that even without martial arts techniques, he remained the strongest, and with a single sweep of his arm, he annihilated the incoming ghostly enemies. Launching himself high into the air, he unleashed another powerful attack that obliterated the surrounding spirits. Observing the battle, Yuda concluded that the old man was indeed a monstrous opponent, fighting the endless waves of dummy players alone as expected. However, he soon realized a troubling possibility. Even with Asura's overwhelming strength, the continuously respawning dummy players meant that the battle might never truly end, and prolonged combat could eventually exhaust even a warrior of Asura's caliber. Determined to assist, Yuda prepared to move, but Nova stopped him, urging him to remain calm and warning that swinging the holy sword without his statistics could cause his body to collapse under the strain, potentially resulting in his death. Yuda acknowledged Nova's warning, but stated that if he did nothing, he would never be able to avenge his fallen comrades. As he spoke, he finished off one of the crawling resurrected players approaching him, determination burning in his eyes as he resolved to act. He told Nova that regardless of the consequences, he needed to find the woman responsible for the suffering of both him and his comrades. Yuda then called out to Asura, stating that he understood Asura's ability to endure the attacks even without evasion, and requested that Asura continue attracting the enemy's attention. Asura was confused by the unfamiliar term Yuda used, but continued eliminating numerous spirits, while warning Yuda not to dare attempt giving orders to him again. Pleased that Asura, despite his anger, was still fulfilling the role of drawing enemy aggression, Yuda recognized that this was his opportunity. Rising into the air, he fought back tears as he looked at the faces of his comrades, silently apologizing to them while understanding that he had no choice but to end their existence. He activated divine punishment, annihilating the resurrected comrades before him, and vowed internally that he would avenge them no matter what path he had to walk. After the dust settled, Asura stood proudly and expressed quiet approval of Yuta's performance, while Yuta struggled to remain standing. Asura remarked that Yuta had proven to be surprisingly useful. Taking a deep breath, Yuta stated that he wanted Asura to remember one thing. The one who would kill the woman would be Yuta himself. Immediately after making that declaration, Yuta collapsed from exhaustion, but Asura caught him before he hit the ground. Smiling, Asura was amused that Yuta had given him orders twice, and while Yuta remained unconscious, Asura decided that he would reward the boy for entertaining him. Carrying Yuta like a prince carrying a princess, Asura told him that if Yuta ever became stronger than Asura himself, he would be given the opportunity to kill the woman, and he expressed anticipation for that future possibility. At a distance, a single foot stepped forward as an unusual figure observed the battle from afar. In the following scene, deep within the mountain range, Asura was seen meditating beneath a waterfall. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and threw a straight punch forward, releasing a tremendous surge of force that destroyed everything in its path. Asura nodded in quiet confirmation, stating internally that the result was exactly as expected since he still could not feel any inner energy within his body. He further concluded that the woman had boldly sealed his dantian, though he considered the act reckless. Asura then looked at Yuta, who was lying on the ground, and decided that he had no choice but to perform an action he had not originally intended. He lightly kicked Yuta from behind, asking how long Yuta planned to continue lying there. However, the so-called gentle kick was far stronger than intended, sending Yuta flying into the nearby wall. Yuta immediately stood up, filled with anger, accusing Asura of finally revealing his true nature and demanding a proper second round of combat. Asura internally questioned whether Yuta had lost his senses, wondering if the boy had a death wish. He stated that he had no time to leisurely exchange blows with Yuta and needed to quickly proceed with the destruction of the remaining towers. Yuta laughed awkwardly, asking why Asura believed that he would accompany him in smashing towers, arguing that instead of mindlessly destroying intact structures, they should first locate the woman's whereabouts. However, Asura suddenly shouted at Yuta, calling him an idiot and questioning whether he still failed to understand the situation. He then asserted that the woman was most likely hiding within the towers, and that, in this cursed world, only the towers created by her truly existed. Asura laughed menacingly and stated that if he destroyed every tower in the world, he would eventually be able to track down the woman and kill her. Yuta finally understood the meaning behind Asura's words, but remained confused as to why he was required to accompany Asura, silently concluding that the man was completely insane. Nova then whispered to Yuta, warning that Asura was far too dangerous regardless of how the situation was viewed. She reminded Yuta that Asura had shattered Yuta's stat window on a mere whim and suggested that staying close to him might lead to unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences. At that moment, Asura asked Nova what she had been whispering about, causing Nova to panic and quickly hide behind Yuta. Asura stated that he did not particularly wish to travel with them either, explaining that he merely found Yuta's swordsmanship somewhat useful. He added that Yuta resembled him in one way since both of them were pursuing the woman, though he emphasized that Yuta's physical condition was far too weak to confront her alone. For that reason, Asura decided to strengthen Yuta's body in a single attempt in the near future. Several days later, a massive tower appeared in the distance, accompanied by the sound of approaching footsteps and a voice announcing that they had finally arrived. Asura stared at the towering structure, stating internally that he could now see the complete form of the tower created by the woman. Turning slightly with a smile, he remarked that Nova had grown significantly stronger within a few days, though he judged that with the current state of the boy's body, his usefulness would remain minimal but not completely non-existent. Nova's appearance had changed drastically from her original form, and she expressed gratitude toward Asura by addressing him as her master. Asura acknowledged her potential, stating that Nova possessed genuine talent, and added that with slightly more time, she might have been able to properly cultivate inner energy techniques. Nova denied the claim, insisting that everything she had achieved was solely due to Master Asura's guidance and teaching. Asura then turned his attention toward Yuta and, with a disappointed expression, stated that he had not expected Yuta to perform even worse than Nova, who was technically his subordinate, and bluntly labeled Yuta as pathetic. Yuta, breathing heavily, told the two that he was following behind them and, with the appearance of someone nearing the point of exhaustion, asked them to wait for a short while. Remembering his training, He wondered how he was supposed to run while carrying something as heavy as a log, comparing the experience to harsh Marine boot camp training, and silently questioned what had happened to the once adorable Nova, whose appearance had changed completely. Lying on the ground and struggling to breathe, Yuda believed that he could not take even a single additional step forward. Asura glanced at him and called him a pathetic brat, remarking that Yuda had barely managed to keep up with their pace. Asura then described the tower as strangely shaped and even more grotesque than the one they had destroyed previously. Nova asked her master whether they were planning to enter the tower immediately, noting that she could not detect anything resembling an entrance. Asura addressed Nova as his disciple and stated that structures such as entrances were unnecessary, explaining that their only purpose there was to reduce the tower to rubble. Nova responded that such an approach was exactly what she expected from her master and predicted that he would destroy the tower with a single strike. Yuda, looking pale and completely stunned, urged them to pause for a moment and carefully reconsider their actions before proceeding further. However, Asura did not hesitate even for a second and unleashed a devastating strike toward the tower, triggering a system warning indicating that a critical error had occurred. Asura was momentarily surprised by the unexpected notification, while the system announced that a forced transfer into the tower's interior had been initiated. The tower then exploded into millions of fragments, leaving Yudao visibly troubled as he stretched out his hand and questioned whether Asura had lost his sanity, reminding him that he had asked for careful consideration before acting. A short time later, the scene shifted to an abandoned city where a brilliant purple light suddenly appeared at the center, transporting the three individuals to the location. Asura looked around in confusion, observing the strange and eerie buildings while Nova gradually returned to her original form. Yuda scanned his surroundings and realized that he was standing inside a city. Nova was shocked, wondering whether they had somehow returned to their original world, but Yuda soon noticed several motionless bodies lying scattered in the distance, belonging to players he recognized. The sight of numerous corpses caused Yuda to question why so many bodies were present, and he concluded that the place could not be the world he once lived in. He struggled to understand where they had been sent. At that moment, purple energy began flowing out from the bodies of the fallen players, drawing Asura's attention as he observed the phenomenon and questioned its meaning. While analyzing the situation, Asura speculated that the souls of the dead might be gathering in a single location. Soon afterward, an unknown voice echoed through the area, describing the situation as intriguing. A mysterious man was seen floating in the air as purple energy converged toward him. Turning his gaze toward Asura, the man declared that regardless of how much Asura struggled, only he would be able to reach the summit of the tower. Raising his hand, the man released a surge of purple energy that summoned a gigantic skeletal entity rising from beneath the ground. Yuda immediately sensed that the summoned skeleton was far from ordinary, realizing that its presence was on an entirely different and far more terrifying level than anything he had encountered before. The purple-eyed skeleton roared as it rose from the ground, prompting Yuda to shout at Asura and warn him that the creature was extremely dangerous and that they needed to escape immediately. However, Asura prepared his attack without hesitation, wearing a menacing smile as he stated internally that such a monster was not worthy of being considered dangerous to someone of his level. When a skeleton attempted to block Asura's strike, the collision triggered a massive explosion, and as the dust settled, Asura stood tall while declaring the skeleton to be worthless trash. Large cracks spread across the skeleton's body, and Asura mocked its level of strength, stating that it was foolish for the creature to believe it had any chance of victory with such limited power. Turning his attention toward the mysterious man, Asura called him arrogant, laughable, and a coward for hiding behind monsters. The man was confused by the accusation that he was concealing himself behind a monster. At that moment, several additional unknown monsters emerged behind the man, who then remarked that Asura's words were entertaining. Annoyed, the man declared that he had changed his mind and ordered Asura to struggle as much as possible, intending to measure how long Asura could survive the test. The monsters immediately charged toward Asura, and he smiled upon hearing that he would be tested. Raising his hand, he addressed the mysterious man as an insignificant existence, foolishly attempting to evaluate him. With a simple wave of his hand, one of the monsters was sent crashing backward into a wall at extreme speed. Another skeleton used the chains wrapped around its body to entangle Asura, wrapping them tightly around him. Yet Asura remained completely motionless. At that moment, another monster attacked Asura from behind, unleashing a powerful strike that caused a massive explosion. However, once the attack ended, the monster's head and body were found sliced into multiple fragments, the result of Asura's own counterattack. Soon afterward, Asura heard the command to summon more creatures, and numerous monsters began materializing out of thin air. Asura showed no sign of panic upon seeing the overwhelming number of monsters surrounding him. Instead, he forcefully stomped one foot onto the ground, cracking the surface beneath him and sending shockwaves through the battlefield, plunging the monsters into disarray at the center of the destruction. At that moment, a red monster attempted a surprise attack from behind, unleashing a powerful strike aimed at Asura. However, Asura effortlessly blocked the attack with a single arm just as it was about to land. The man continued summoning more monsters in an attempt to restrain Asura, though Asura's expression gradually showed growing annoyance at the situation. The man then spoke, stating that he could not understand Asura's existence, since Asura possessed no detectable statistics and no visible skill signatures, leaving him puzzled about how such overwhelming power could exist without system recognition. Asura remained silent, staring at the man without responding. The man then drew two magical swords and declared internally that there was no need for further conversation, explaining that he would simply absorb Asura's soul to uncover the truth himself. Activating a skill known as Death Mark, he charged directly toward Asura. When the attack struck, a tremendous explosion erupted, forcing Yuda and Nova to retreat due to the overwhelming destructive force released by the impact. Yuda was shocked by the terrifying level of destruction displayed by the man, realizing that in a direct one-on-one confrontation, the man might be evenly matched with Asura. He wondered about the true identity of the mysterious individual. Nova urged Yuda to flee, stating that the man was no longer comparable to an ordinary player, and admitted that although she did not fully understand the reason, she could clearly sense the presence of power similar to that of the goddess Asura. Moments later, the city lay in ruins as a result of the intense battle. The man declared that Asura had become the final remaining soul target, describing him as a highly troublesome existence. However, he added that with this outcome, his contract with the goddess Asura was now complete. Raising his hand and referring to Asura as an unknown player, he activated the authority skill known as Soul Absorption, stating internally that Asura's soul would be put to proper use. At that moment, Asura shattered the man's skill by forcing his way through it and finished off the nearby monsters with a single strike, leaving the man completely shocked by the outcome. Hearing the man speak about the woman he referred to as a goddess, Asura questioned whether he was talking about the accursed woman who had sealed Asura's dantian. Asura then stated that he was merely searching for that woman, and that the situation had unexpectedly become convenient for him. Wearing a menacing expression, Asura warned the man that if he wished to live, he must reveal the location of the goddess. Hearing this, the man internally concluded that the outcome was inevitable and that capturing the final soul would not be an easy task. Power surged through the man as he declared that the person destined to die inside the tower would not be him, but Asura himself. Immediately afterward, the man launched a barrage of attacks using summoned swords, though Asura casually deflected all of them, as if brushing away insignificant insects. Asura caught one of the thrown blades midair and hurled it back toward the man with tremendous speed. The knife narrowly missed the man's head, passing just beside him before striking the wall behind him and triggering a massive explosion. Observing the attack, the man laughed loudly, calling Asura an incomprehensible existence. He then admitted that he would no longer deny Asura's strength and would face him with full seriousness. Activating another skill known as Armor of Death King, Hades Armor, the man surged forward at maximum speed. Raising both swords, he prepared to strike while internally mocking Asura and questioning whether he would be able to withstand the incoming attack. The man unleashed a powerful attack, but Asura easily evaded it, laughing menacingly as he questioned whether that was the extent of the man's abilities. Furious, the man declared that he was far from finished and launched himself high into the air, preparing another devastating strike. Asura simultaneously gathered power within his fist, agreeing that the confrontation was far from over. As the man's attack descended, Asura blocked it with his fist, stating that the difference in their strength was far too great for the man to inflict any meaningful damage. A massive explosion erupted from the collision, and when the dust cleared, the man was still standing, laughing loudly as he acknowledged Asura's strength while claiming it would only last for a brief moment. The man then announced that he intended to reveal the truth, explaining that the goddess Asura was the one who had granted him authority over the tower. However, he admitted that he had not yet obtained complete control over the tower's authority. To achieve that, he formed a contract with goddess Asura, promising to offer 10,000 player souls in exchange for being reborn as the true heir of the tower. At that moment, Nova was revealed to have been captured, and the man smiled menacingly, declaring that with the young girl in his possession, he had successfully gathered all required souls. Upon seeing Nova, Yuda called out to her in panic and rushed toward the man while demanding to know what had been done to her. The man dismissed Yuda as insignificant and ordered him to stay out of the way. Suddenly, a massive monster emerged behind Yuda and struck him with overwhelming force, causing Yuda to cough up blood before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Standing tall amidst his army of monsters, the man declared that Asura and Yuda were now powerless to resist him. The system announced that the man had successfully collected the final 10,000 souls and that all tower authority would soon be unlocked, with 1 minute and 4 seconds remaining until full activation. Observing the situation, Asura deduced that the man was a necromancer who specialized in controlling vengeful spirits. He noted that similar practitioners of such forbidden techniques had existed within his own kingdom, recalling the presence of vile demonic cults that had once practiced corrupt sorcery. Asura began gathering green energy within his hand and stated internally that he would normally never employ such unclean techniques, but the man had crossed a line far beyond what he considered tolerable. He resolved to demonstrate the true form of necromancy and allow the man to witness the power of authentic soul manipulation. At that moment, the collected spirits began flowing out from the man's body, and the man watched in disbelief as the souls he had gathered were forcibly taken by Asura. He could not comprehend how such an act was possible, since it should have been fundamentally impossible within the system's rules. Soon afterward, the souls of Yuda and Nova also emerged from their physical bodies and were brought under Asura's control. Asura commanded them to unleash their instincts freely, declaring internally that from that moment forward, they would become the instruments used to crush the accursed man who had caused their suffering. Yuda regained consciousness at that moment, feeling confused by the situation and briefly questioning whether he had already died. Examining himself, he wondered if his current state was that of a spirit. Turning toward Asura, Yuda asked whether Asura was responsible for what had happened and demanded the immediate return of his physical body. Asura responded with visible irritation, questioning who Yuda believed he was accusing, and stated that if Yuda had remained in that condition, he would have already been dead. Asura clarified that the separation of Yuda's soul from his body was not his doing, but rather the work of the unknown man. The man had attempted to use necromancy to control Yuda and the other souls as if they were puppets. To counter the attack, Asura used his own necromantic power to break the man's control, separating Yuda's soul from his body and allowing the body to gradually recover. He then told Yuda to stop complaining and follow his instructions. Asura also revealed that he had absorbed several of the souls controlled by the man, rendering the opponent significantly weakened. Looking at his own body, Yuda realized that even after receiving the power of necromancy, he did not feel any substantial change. Nevertheless, both Yuda and Nova became energized, and Asura instructed them to demonstrate the true strength of authentic necromantic power. The man stepped forward in anger, furious that his souls had been stolen and dismissing the idea that he had been reduced to nothing. He mocked Asura, claiming that the stolen souls were insignificant and that only 2 souls had been taken, which he described as the true essence of necromantic power. Asura laughed at the statement, finding it absurd that the man continued measuring strength through meaningless numerical comparison. At that moment, Yuda charged toward one of the monsters at full speed, and before the creature could react, it was instantly cleaved into 2 halves. Witnessing this, the man was shocked by the sudden and effortless display of power. The man was shocked by the sudden surge of power displayed by Yuda and wondered where such strength had come from, considering that only moments earlier Yuda had been barely clinging to life. As the city lay in further ruin, 2 monsters charged toward Nova, and as they were about to strike, Nova remained completely motionless, causing Yuda to become worried and question whether she had yet regained consciousness. However, just as the monsters were about to attack, something within Nova awakened. In less than a second, the heads of the approaching monsters were violently destroyed, scattering into fragments. A massive explosion followed, and Nova finally regained full awareness while wondering what had just happened. Asura stood silently observing the situation, while Yuda immediately asked Nova if she was unharmed. Nova responded that she felt unusually strong. Yuda also stated that he felt significantly stronger after obtaining necromantic power, though he recognized that continuing the battle in this manner would lead to an endless cycle of combat. At that moment, additional monsters began appearing once more, and Asura continued standing in silence while carefully observing the situation. The man then checked his system interface, prompting Asura to finally speak and explain that defeating the man required first destroying the repulsive blue status window. However, Asura acknowledged that his dantian was currently sealed, preventing the use of internal energy, making the destruction of the interface difficult. Yuda asked whether there was still a possible method of victory and questioned whether necromancy could still be used despite the sealing of Asura's Dantian. Asura agreed, explaining that even without internal energy, external energy manipulation posed no difficulty for him. He further stated that with sufficient external energy, he could generate force comparable to internal martial power. While speaking, Asura turned his attention toward Nova, remarking that her energy possessed an unusual and intriguing quality. He then addressed Nova, instructing her to offer her soul to him, a statement that left her visibly shocked. The system issued a warning indicating that there were not enough souls available to satisfy the quest requirements and instructed the man to obtain additional souls to complete the mission. The man appeared enraged, cursing the interference of those he considered insignificant, believing that their presence was wasting the souls he needed for the quest. However, he concluded that he could still gather more souls and first needed to eliminate the obstacles standing in his way. Raising his hand, the man summoned the souls under his control and commanded them to sweep away all enemies before him. The monsters immediately charged toward the three opponents. Asura, maintaining a confident expression, instructed Yuda to remember that he would only have one opportunity to succeed and urged him to trust Asura completely while pouring all available strength into the effort. Asura then ordered Yuda to clear a path so that he could reach the man. Gripping his sword tightly, Yuda declared internally that his trust in Asura was not solely based on confidence in the man himself, but also on his determination to protect Nova and himself. With that resolve, Yuda wasted no time and charged toward the enemies, activating the holy sword of Asterian skill. Meanwhile, the man mocked Asura and the others as fools for exhausting all their power merely to eliminate the surrounding horde, laughing menacingly while declaring that such effort was completely futile. He stated that their strength was far from sufficient to control the massive number of souls he had accumulated. However, at that moment, Asura suddenly appeared directly in front of the man and remarked that the man behaved exactly as expected of a coward. Asura revealed that he had been observing the man's repeated use of the blue status window to monitor the death of every spirit under his control. Clenching his fist tightly while Nova supported him from behind, Asura declared that the man's exhausting necromantic game would end there. With those words, Asura struck the man's status window with a powerful punch. A massive explosion erupted in the man's interface, now revealing his true identity as Lee Chanwoo along with all displayed statistics, shattered into countless fragments under the force of the attack. Lee Chanwoo stood in complete shock, unable to accept that everything he had possessed had been destroyed so easily and humiliatingly. He internally refused to acknowledge the loss of his status window, his accumulated power, and the world he had constructed. At that moment, an error notification appeared, indicating that the soul data registered within the system had become corrupted, resulting in the permanent deletion of all stored souls and the failure of the heir's ritual quest. Yuda was lying on the ground after returning to his original physical body, and upon regaining consciousness, he wondered whether he had truly been restored to his original state. Clutching the area where he had once been pierced by the monster's attack, he realized with surprise that his body had healed exactly as Asura had promised, filling him with astonishment. Yuda began questioning the true identity of Asura and the limits of the man's power. Meanwhile, Lee was thrown into a state of emotional breakdown, refusing to accept what had occurred and repeatedly insisting that the situation could not end in such a manner. He blamed Asura for the outcome, trembling with rage and tears as he shouted internally that he had lost the only method he possessed to save his world from impending destruction. In the past, as people fled in panic from the spreading chaos, Lee had been quietly listening to music through his headphones. Noticing the fleeing crowd, he removed his headphones and saw multiple portals suddenly opening across the sky. Shock filled Lee's expression as he observed the phenomenon. Moments later, the city had fallen into complete ruin due to the rampaging monsters. Bodies lay scattered across the ground with no remaining signs of life, except for Lee, who remained on his knees in a state of stunned despair amid the devastation. At that moment, while Lee was contemplating his next course of action, the goddess Ashwa suddenly appeared before him, and from that encounter, the events ultimately led to the present situation. Hearing this, Yuda questioned Lee's sudden change of topic and asked what Lee meant by the destruction of his world. Yuda further asked whether Lee was not a player summoned from another world just like himself and the others, wondering why Lee's world would suddenly face annihilation. Lee explained that when he was first summoned as a player, his world was marked for destruction due to an approaching monster wave. He revealed that his sole motivation had been to save his world at any cost, believing that he could achieve that goal through the power granted to him. driven by the determination to save everyone. He climbed the tower with a single objective, eventually discovering the truth that whoever conquered the tower would gain the authority to create a new world. Yuda was shocked to learn that such a power existed, realizing that the tower's ultimate reward was the ability to construct an entirely new world. Lee confirmed this, stating that his intention had been to use that authority to reconstruct his destroyed world inside the tower, restoring it exactly as it had been before its destruction. He wanted to protect and save his people using his own strength, believing that he had finally obtained the power to safeguard everyone. Clenching his fist, Lee blamed them for ruining everything, insisting that if they had not interfered, the quest would have already been completed by that point. Asura spoke, telling Lee to preserve his cowardly justifications, and openly labeled him a coward. He stated that someone like Lee would never be able to save anyone, much less an entire world. Asura then questioned why Lee had fled when his world was actually approaching destruction, arguing that Lee had never truly intended to save his people in the first place. He further challenged Lee's claim by asking whether Lee had sought the power to recreate a world rather than the power to genuinely save it, suggesting that Lee's ambition was nothing more than a meaningless numerical game. Asura then stated that Lee was foolish to believe he could rebuild the world using such power, emphasizing that attempting such an act within the tower held no real meaning. Stepping forward, Asura declared that since Lee appeared to have lost his grasp on reality due to grief, he intended to teach him a harsh truth. He asserted that Lee had merely sought escape from his suffering and wished to become a hero in a fabricated sense. Lee suddenly shouted for Asura to be silent before charging forward in anger, but Asura struck him with a powerful blow that sent him flying backward at high speed. Coughing blood and struggling to breathe after the attack, Lee internally rejected Asura's words, believing that Asura was mistaken and that Lee's true intention had always been to save everyone. At that moment, he recalled his encounter with the goddess, who had addressed him as a player and informed him that he had successfully cleared all stages of the tower. She had further explained that if he wished, he could return to his world to confront the monster wave at the moment, just before its destruction and attempt to save it. Lee remained completely expressionless upon remembering those words. The goddess then presented another choice, proposing that Lee could accept a special quest, inherit the tower's authority, and recreate his world inside the tower itself. She instructed him to make a decision and asked whether he would return to his original world to fight the monster wave and become a hero trapped in an endless war, or instead construct the world he desired within the tower and become its savior. Lee faced the goddess without showing any emotion and declared that he would inherit the tower's power and save his own world. Returning to the present, a system notification suddenly appeared, warning that the tower structure was collapsing and that all stored data would be permanently erased as the tower itself began to disintegrate. Yuda questioned what was happening and whether the tower was truly collapsing. He called out to Asura, asking what they should do since they would be crushed along with the falling tower if nothing was done. At that moment, Lee spoke and revealed that the goddess Ashwa had once told him that all towers in this world ultimately converged into a single path. He admitted that he did not fully understand the meaning behind the single path, but speculated that reaching its end might allow them to encounter goddess Ashwa. Lee then told the others that if they wished to find Ashwa, they would need to follow that path. Yuda asked Lee what he meant by the single path and questioned why he was choosing to share that information with them. Lee answered that the suppressed memories he had tried so hard to forget had resurfaced, forcing him to realize that Asura's words were correct. He was simply a coward who had chosen to escape a cruel reality by pretending to be a hero. He further stated that acknowledging this truth now would not change anything, since he had already forfeited the opportunity to return to his original world. Having abandoned that choice, he believed he no longer had any reason to continue living within a world he considered empty. Lee then informed them that the exit was located at the rear of the tower and warned that delaying their escape might cause even that passage to vanish as the structure continued collapsing. He urged them to leave before the tower fully disintegrated. Upon hearing this, Asura asked whether Lee intended to remain behind. When Lee confirmed his decision, Asura accepted it, describing Lee as a coward but not someone utterly pathetic, and instructed him to do as he wished. As Asura walked away, he stated that if he eventually encountered the goddess and destroyed her, he would also consider avenging Lee in his own way. Yuda called out to Asura, questioning whether they truly intended to abandon Lee. He suggested that Lee could accompany them in their search for Ashwa. However, Asura ordered Yuda to remain silent, explaining that Lee had already lost a life-and-death battle. He added that in such battles, the victor shows mercy by allowing the defeated opponent to choose the place where he would meet death, and that such mercy was among the greatest that could be granted. Yuda remained unsatisfied with leaving Lee behind, but Nova warned him that time was running out and that the entire tower was on the verge of total collapse. Gritting his teeth, Yuda acknowledged the warning. Yet he lifted Lee onto his back in a piggyback carry, refusing to abandon a person's life simply because of defeat. Nova watched in surprise at Yuda's unexpected action. Unable to move after the battle, Lee asked Yuda what he was doing, stating that he had no remaining purpose or power, and that even if he left the tower, there was nothing left in his life worth continuing. Yuda shouted at Lee, insisting that even if he had no purpose at that moment, he would eventually find one if he continued living, and warned Lee not to throw his life away. Lee remained silent for a moment after hearing those words. He then asked for Yuda's name, causing Yuda to question why such information was being requested in a situation like that. Yuda then revealed his name and asked whether Lee felt satisfied knowing it. Lee remarked that it was an unusual name. Yuda then asked for Lee's name, and Lee provided it, prompting Yuda to comment that Lee's name was not particularly impressive either. Changing the subject, Lee stated that he had one final request and handed a glowing golden magical sphere to Yuda, surprising him. Lee instructed Yuda to use the power contained within it for a righteous purpose. Yuda demanded to know the meaning behind the gesture and told Lee to take the sphere back, insisting that he had never asked for such power. However, Lee was already beginning to fade away slowly. He explained that even if he left the tower, he would eventually cease to exist because without the system's support, maintaining his physical form would be impossible. As his body continued dissolving, he called Yuda's name and told him to return to his original world. Tears filled Yuda's eyes as he held the magical sphere and watched Lee vanish completely from sight. At that moment, the system issued a warning indicating that the tower was about to collapse completely, with only 1 second remaining on the timer. When the countdown reached 0, the system confirmed that all tower data would be permanently erased. Immediately afterward, a massive black hole appeared and swallowed the entire tower. After several moments, the system notified that the tower had completely vanished. In another location, the goddess sat observing the situation with a visibly irritated expression. Suddenly, she stood up and spoke with a menacing smile, dismissing the destruction as merely the loss of a single tower and referring to Asura as a statless player, challenging him to exert greater effort. Returning to the main scene, the system announced that all tower data had been deleted. Yuda remained shocked by the sudden disappearance of everything around him. He began questioning whether it had already been too late to save Lee the moment the status window shattered. He recalled that when a player's status window was destroyed, the physical body would also perish, leading him to realize that he should have died as well. This made him wonder why he had survived, unlike Lee. He also questioned whether any portion of system power still remained within his body. Asura stepped forward and asked why Yuda had been wearing such a serious expression for some time. He further asked whether Yuda was thinking about the death of the Spirit Master, and upon observing Yuda's expression, he concluded that Yuda was more sentimental than he appeared. Yuda asked if Asura intended to begin lecturing him again. Yuda admitted that he felt uneasy about Lee, acknowledging that Lee had indeed been an enemy, but the feeling left behind was strangely bittersweet. At the end, he held the object Lee had entrusted to him, remembering the instruction to use it for the right purpose and to eventually return to his original world. Yuda stated that he did not fully understand the nature of the power contained within the object, but decided that he would first give it to Asura. He added that somehow, this felt like the correct decision at that moment and extended the glowing object toward Asura. Upon holding the object, Asura remarked that he could sense the damned goddess chi emanating from it, and speculated that this power might be capable of unsealing his Dantian. Yuda asked whether Asura would be unable to recover his full strength, but Asura told him not to jump to conclusions, explaining that only a very small portion of his sealed power could be restored using the object. Although the energy within the object felt identical to hers, it was far weaker than the chi that had originally sealed his Dantian. Yuda admitted that he had been curious for some time and asked what the term Dantian meant. He further stated that Asura was exceptionally strong regardless of that concept. Asura replied that the power he currently used was external martial art, relying purely on physical bodily strength. Yuda and Nova were both shocked upon hearing this. Yuda asked whether Asura had been fighting using only pure physical strength ever since encountering Ashwa, while Nova simply stated that Asura was a monster. Asura explained that if his Dantian were restored, he would be able to use internal energy, a force that channels chi circulating through the body to generate strength far beyond external martial techniques. Yuda asked whether internal energy was comparable to magic skills. Reflecting on the situation, Yuda concluded that Asura was formidable even without a status window, strong enough to destroy both the stat window system and the tower itself. He wondered how high Asura's statistics would have been if such numbers had existed. Nova asked what Yuda was thinking, and Yuda admitted that he was speculating about what Asura's strength would look like if represented through statistical values. Asura then delivered a light punch to Yuda's head, questioning whether Yuda was still attempting to evaluate strength using those blue windows and numerical measurements. Yuda, rubbing the bump on his head, remarked that Asura possessed exceptionally sharp senses in addition to overwhelming strength. He then shifted the topic and asked what Asura truly meant by strength. Hearing the question, Asura called Yuda foolish. Raising his hand, he clenched his fist tightly and explained that strength was fundamentally born from blood, sweat, training, and relentless effort. Asura instructed Yuda to listen carefully, explaining that to deliver a powerful punch, he had once swung his fist 1,000 times every day. He questioned whether someone who swung it 1,001 times would automatically be stronger, then answered his own question by stating that the answer was no. Charging power into his fist, he continued that strength was not defined by numerical repetition beyond 1,000, but by the intensity of one's yearning for power with every strike delivered. In essence, true strength was achieved by pouring one's entire heart into the pursuit of a desired goal, and what was gained through that process was genuine strength. As he spoke, Asura unleashed a full-force punch straight forward, and the destructive force of the strike obliterated everything along its trajectory. Yuda and Nova stood in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the display. Asura looked backward and asked whether the two of them understood. He then changed the subject, examining the object he was holding and stating that the real challenge was determining how to properly utilize the power contained within it. At that moment, Asura grew visibly furious, sensing the presence of numerous unknown variables surrounding the situation. He mentioned Mo internally, questioning what she had been planning by sending him to this world. In the midst of the beautiful scenery, Asura tossed the object back toward Yuda and asked whether it was his first time seeing it as well. Yuda confirmed this and explained that because of someone's interference, referring indirectly to Asura, his statistics had been shattered before he could complete the tower. Depressed, Yuda admitted that he believed everything would end once he reached the tower's summit. Listening to Yuda's explanation, Asura turned around and asked whether that individual might possess knowledge of the situation. Yuda appeared confused about the person Asura was referring to. Asura repeated his question, wondering whether that person also desired the power contained within the object, and then ordered the individual in question to reveal themselves. At that moment, an unknown figure stepped forward. As the mysterious being approached, Asura speculated whether the entity was a monster that had somehow survived the tower's collapse, noting that he could not sense any red aura emanating from it. Asura asked the identity of the stranger, but the person remained silent and instead pointed their weapon directly at him. Receiving no response, Asura laughed loudly and stated that further conversation was unnecessary, instructing the opponent to attack him directly. The mysterious individual planted their feet firmly on the ground and swung a massive axe toward Asura. Asura easily evaded the strike and immediately began gathering power to counterattack. Asura then delivered a powerful punch that sent the mysterious figure flying high into the air. Fortunately, the stranger managed to block the strike using their weapon, preventing the attack from landing fully. At that moment, the mysterious figure activated the axe-style skill and leaped high into the air, preparing to unleash a devastating strike toward Asura. Immediately afterward, the individual used another technique known as Earth Splitter, causing the entire ground to shatter into countless fragments upon impact. As the smoke gradually cleared, blood droplets could be seen falling onto the ground, revealing that Asura had blocked the attack using only one arm, though his hand had sustained injury from the collision. Asura smiled and commented internally that the opponent possessed a rather solid combat stance. The mysterious figure was shocked that Asura had successfully blocked the strike. In the next moment, Asura grasped the weapon with immense force, cracking its structure as he charged forward. He stated that targeting him with such power was ultimately meaningless. Asura then struck the opponent's face with a powerful blow, cracking the mask and sending the mysterious figure flying backward at extreme speed under the force of the attack. He told the opponent to increase their level of effort. At that moment, a voice filled with anger declared that the attacker would never be forgiven. Yuda turned toward the source of the voice and was surprised to see that the figure was a beautiful blonde woman. The woman, wearing an enraged expression, demanded to know why they had destroyed her tower. Yuda was stunned, acknowledging that they had indeed destroyed a tower, while Nova added that they had not realized the structure belonged to the woman. The blonde woman remained visibly furious. She shouted that they should not pretend ignorance, because she had clearly witnessed the three of them destroying the tower. She then demanded to know their objective and the reason behind their actions. Asura remained silent, standing motionless while the blonde woman continued speaking. She stated that because of the three of them, she had been wandering through a desolate world for 2 years, unable to return to her original world despite having once believed she could do so. However, her words were abruptly interrupted when Asura struck the back of her head with a sharp karate chop, knocking her unconscious onto the ground. Asura then questioned why a defeated individual spoke so excessively. Yuda watched the scene in shock and confusion, struggling to process what he had just witnessed and heard. After some time, as the sun began to set, the blonde woman sat on the ground and sincerely apologized to the three of them for the misunderstanding, admitting that she had nearly harmed them. She repeated her apology, while Yuda and Nova responded with smiles, stating that the situation was understandable and urging her to stand up. After she rose to her feet, Yuda shifted the topic and expressed surprise that she had managed to reach the tower's summit with her statistical configuration. Addressing the blonde woman by name, Kalina, Yuda asked whether he could examine her status window once more. Kalina agreed and displayed her interface. The status window revealed that she was level 86, possessing 80,000 health points and 120,000 mana points, while her remaining stat points amounted to 86 million. Observing the display, Yuda internally found the numbers unbelievable no matter how many times he reviewed them, continuing to be astonished that she had reached the tower's summit with such a build. He concluded that these values suggested she had only leveled up without allocating her stat points, and he wondered whether the woman standing before him was a combatant on the same monstrous level as Asura. Yuda changed the subject and asked again whether Kalina had truly stated that nothing existed at the top of the tower. Kalina confirmed this, explaining that there was nothing there and that even ordinary monsters were absent. She added that instead, the system displayed error messages indicating that the available statistics were insufficient, after which the tower itself began to disappear. Reflecting on Kalina's words, Yuda concluded that this outcome was expected and must have been the work of Ashwa. Kalina reacted with surprise upon hearing the name. Yuda continued by explaining that Ashwa was the entity that granted them the status windows and power, and that she was the one who summoned them into the tower. He added that they were pursuing that entity in order to return to their original world. Kalina then turned her attention toward Asura, remarking that he appeared to be the same type of being, but noticed that he was currently meditating. She wondered internally what he was doing at that moment. Yuda also expressed confusion, acknowledging that it was a valid question. At that moment, the golden sphere began emitting a powerful radiance and floated into the air, while a red aura also surged outward from Asura's body. As the golden sphere shone brighter, a massive surge of energy spread outward, destroying everything in the nearby surroundings. Yuda and Nova wondered what was happening. Chains manifested and bound Asura's body, and Yuda internally thought that since Asura was only recovering his dantian, the overly dramatic manifestation of power seemed unnecessary. Suddenly, a shocking sensation struck Yuda, causing his head to ache. In the following scene, a magnificent castle was shown being destroyed as meteorite-like fragments rained down upon the city, shattering buildings upon impact. A multi-armed, mysterious entity was seen attacking the city, while a woman resembling the goddess Ashwa appeared terrified by the sudden devastation. Moments later, the surroundings returned to normal, but Yuda remained troubled by the memories he had just witnessed, noticing that one of the faces within those visions felt strangely familiar. Asura stood at a distance, observing the horizon while examining his own hand, remarking internally that a small amount of internal energy had begun to circulate within his body. However, he judged the amount to be far too insignificant to be of real use. He concluded that he would need far more of this power to fully unseal his dantian. Asura reflected that the seal placed upon him by Ashwa had to be broken using this newly obtained energy. Wearing a menacing smile, he resolved to reclaim his lost strength and believed that by utilizing this external energy, he could eventually restore his dantian completely. Meanwhile, Yuda and Kalina continued standing in stunned silence. Turning toward Yuda, Asura urged him to hurry and proceed to the next tower. Yuda responded that not every tower necessarily possessed a successor's power, and that some towers might not yet have chosen an heir. At that moment, Nova spoke, stating that she knew a possible route forward. Yuda was surprised upon noticing that Nova's appearance had changed once again. Nova was now surrounded by a purple aura that flowed around her body. She explained that she did not fully understand what had happened, but could feel the fundamental flow of power throughout the world, sensing both great and minor sources of energy. She believed she had identified their destination and raised her hands forward, allowing the purple aura to flow through her palms. Nova declared internally that she would guide them toward the location where the successor's power resided. She appeared determined to assist the group, and Yuda also became resolute after discovering a possible solution to part of their dilemma. At night, a massive castle stood under the dark sky as footsteps echoed within its corridors. Inside, a silver-haired man with pointed ears was seen walking while reporting to the ruler. He explained that the Bloodwind Fields, farmland personally designed by the Demon King, were collecting a portion of the harvest each month as maintenance fees. Additionally, the Dark Mine was operating as scheduled, delivering 1 gold bar every month as planned. Another man sat upon the throne, listening quietly. He possessed black hair and horns, and he smiled while stating that the current progress was satisfactory, estimating that reaching 1 million coins would not be far from reality. He then addressed the silver-haired man, identifying him as Graydon and telling him to take some rest after his long service. Graydon responded that there was one unusual matter that required attention. Curious, the ruler asked about the issue. Graydon reported that while a soldier was patrolling the eastern wall, an unidentified group had been discovered nearby. Although the identity of the group was not confirmed, Graydon deduced that a new hero party had likely appeared within the demon realm. The ruler repeated the phrase, hero party, with a questioning tone and asked whether those people had still not accepted reality. Smiling menacingly, he declared that it did not matter who they were, instructing them to approach if they wished, as no one would be able to take even a single step into his castle. As he spoke, Asura and his companions were shown, standing in a state of surprise at the situation surrounding them. In the following scene, a notification system confirmed that player Kalina's statistics had been validated and that the system code was operating normally, initiating transportation to tower number 008. Immediately afterward, the team was teleported into an unfamiliar kingdom, leaving Yuda surprised that they had entered the tower so easily. Yuda turned toward Asura and remarked that possessing statistics in this world was certainly more convenient. Asura, however, became visibly irritated, displeased that Yuda continued mentioning the blue status windows. Asura stated that even the time spent discussing such matters was wasteful and emphasized that he needed to restore his Dantian as quickly as possible. He then asked Nova about the location of the successor they were searching for. Nova pointed toward a distant direction where a massive castle stood and informed Asura that the successor's power was located inside. Within the castle, a man was angrily shouting at Hero Evan, reprimanding him for failing once again to subdue the Demon King and questioning how long it would take before Evan could capture his target. Evan scratched his head casually, showing no sign of concern, and explained that they had been very close to success, but the equipment had malfunctioned at the final moment. He laughed it off while suggesting that if the kingdom could provide slightly better equipment, victory would be achievable. The ruler reminded Evan that only a few months earlier, they had already supplied him with top-tier equipment. Evan agreed that this was true, but added that the weapons did not suit his personal style. He then smiled and requested the selection of new sanuses, claiming that his divine power had recently weakened. The ruler, enraged by Evan's shameless attitude, called his name and declared that Evan was no longer the kingdom's hero and would be banished. Evan appeared troubled and questioned the sudden decision, insisting that this time would be different because he had prepared a secret weapon. However, the ruler added that if Evan was unaware that, under the guise of subjugating the Demon King, he had been secretly embezzling the national treasury and living a dissolute lifestyle, then he should leave immediately. The ruler, speaking with a serious tone, warned Evan that if he did not withdraw at once, he would be executed on the spot. Evan raised his hands with a menacing expression, accusing the ruler of being overly strict that day and questioning whether the ruler understood the effort he had invested in serving the country. However, at that moment, a massive explosion suddenly erupted as the castle walls were blown apart. The guards, shocked by the blast, wondered what was happening and speculated whether it was a raid by the Demon King's army. As Asura appeared through the destruction, the guards feared that it might be an attack by the Demon King's forces. Nova pointed toward Evan and informed Asura that Evan was the successor, stating that she could clearly sense the successor's power emanating from him. Without wasting time, Asura charged toward Evan and demanded that he surrender the successor's power immediately if he wished to survive. The guards became enraged that Asura and his companions had caused such chaos, rushing forward to suppress them while declaring that the punishment for defiling the royal family was immediate execution. At that moment, Asura swung his fist, striking the guards and sending them flying backward with tremendous force. Witnessing this, Evan quickly formed a plan. The remaining guards were stunned that 2 of their comrades had been defeated by a single punch. Meanwhile, Evan smiled menacingly and informed the ruler that these individuals were the secret weapon he had previously mentioned, referring to Asura and the others. Evan further explained that not only the man who had displayed superhuman strength, but every individual present was far stronger than the kingdom's average S-rank mercenary, a statement that surprised both Yuda and Kalina. He continued by stating that together, they would undoubtedly succeed in subjugating the Demon King Belzer. Asura was taken aback upon hearing Evan's declaration. Moments later, inside a narrow alleyway, Evan was forcefully thrown into a pile of wooden barrels. Asura, clearly irritated, demanded to know what nonsense Evan had been speaking about. Evan stood up with a smile and apologized, asking whether they were new players or successors. Before Yuda could respond, Evan told him to forget the question, claiming that such details were unimportant. Based on their earlier statements, Evan deduced that they were searching for the successor's power. He concluded that they had arrived at the correct location and suggested that they should cooperate in subjugating the Demon King. However, Asura angrily ordered Evan to remain silent and stop speaking such absurdities, stating that he intended to extract the successor's power directly from Evan's body. Evan responded seriously, telling Asura to attempt it if he wished. Evan added that Asura appeared overly confident about extracting the successor's power without destroying it. Asura, enraged, questioned Evan's statement. Evan explained that forcibly taking another successor's power would result in its destruction, and therefore proposed that if Asura and his party assisted him in completing the Demon King subjugation quest, he would willingly transfer his power afterward. Yuda and Nova were shocked by the proposal, while Asura dismissed it as an utterly worthless offer. Yuda asked Asura to pause for a moment, suggesting that Evan's claim might actually be valid. He reminded Asura that Li Chanwu's power had not been taken by force either, since Li Chanwu had willingly transferred himself. Hearing this, Evan saw an opportunity to use Yuda's reasoning to his advantage and immediately shook Yuda's hand, stating that Yuda was someone he could speak with. He then introduced himself as Evan, prompting Yuda to also introduce himself. Yuda then questioned how Evan knew that the successor's power could not be forcibly extracted, but Evan quickly avoided answering and instead redirected his attention to the others, asking whether they would assist in defeating the Demon King. Kalina admitted that she did not trust Evan, but also acknowledged that they had limited options and asked for Asura's opinion. Asura remained silent for a moment before speaking, warning that if he detected even the slightest sign of deception, he would personally break Evan's neck. Evan accepted the warning without hesitation. Evan then stated that since an agreement had been reached, they should first prepare and organize their equipment before proceeding further. Moments later, the group arrived at the domain where the Demon King resided, and they were surprised to find that the area was far more expansive than they had anticipated. Evan, appearing motivated, stated internally that it was time to begin the subjugation of the Demon King. However, Asura immediately removed his newly acquired armor and threw it onto the ground, prompting Evan to angrily question what he was doing. Asura explained that armor would only hinder his movement and that he had no need for such equipment. Although visibly irritated, Evan was forced to accept the decision since the armor had been expensive. Turning toward Kalina, Evan asked whether she also needed the armor, but Kalina, already wearing her new equipment while emphasizing her well-proportioned physique, expressed that she liked it. Asura instructed Evan not to waste any more time and to guide them toward the Demon King. While Evan was explaining the route to the Demon King's castle, several missile launch systems activated in the distance. As the missiles were fired toward them, the five of them noticed the incoming projectiles and realized they were being targeted by missile fire. Yuda commented that launching an attack immediately after their arrival was dishonorable. Meanwhile, inside the Demon King's castle, the Demon King mocked Evan as a foolish hero, wondering whether Evan had still not learned his lesson despite being defeated repeatedly. Opening his status interface, the Demon King declared that he would handle the hero properly this time, using his most perfected creation. Activating his secret weapon, he intended to completely erase Evan from the Demon King's castle. As the missiles were about to strike, Evan immediately activated his skill known as Otherworld's Universal Warehouse, creating a barrier that blocked the incoming attacks. Afterward, he turned around to check whether the others were unharmed. Witnessing this, Yuda internally concluded that Evan was remarkable for being able to neutralize such a large-scale assault at once. Although he considered Evan an irritating person, he acknowledged that a successor was still a successor in the end. Evan appeared visibly irritated that the Demon King Belzer had launched a full-scale attack from the very beginning of the confrontation. He then warned everyone to listen carefully, explaining that every piece of terrain within the Demon Realm was part of a dungeon system created by the Demon King himself. He emphasized that the lava, rocks, trees, and all other environmental elements could be transformed into weapons by the Demon King. Therefore, if they lower their guard even for a moment, attacks could emerge from anywhere without warning. At that moment, additional attacks continued to target the group. Soon after, Demon King Belzer emerged from his castle and addressed hero Evan, asking whether he had brought more companions this time. Laughing menacingly, Belzer declared that he would not allow them to ascend to the Demon King's castle freely. Hearing this, Evan became furious. Evan demanded to know how long Belzer intended to remain in hiding and challenged him to fight openly if he truly considered himself the Demon King. With an enraged expression, Evan declared that regardless of how much Belzer attempted to hide, he would never succeed in stopping him. Hearing this, Belzer smiled menacingly and stated that if such was Evan's will, it could not be helped. He then declared that he would resist that determination with all his strength. At that moment, Yuda noticed the status window and was surprised to see that the Demon King also possessed one, prompting him to wonder whether Belzer was also a player like the others. The surroundings began to shift, and the Demon King instructed the heroes to watch carefully as he summoned a new Demon Realm dungeon, explaining that it had been personally designed for them. The system announced the download of new map data, confirming that a new dungeon had been added to the Demon Realm and that the designated entities were being transported into the updated environment. Moments later, inside the dungeon, Yuda was seen panicking while fleeing from a massive rolling boulder, wondering why the area contained so many traps. He recalled that he had only stepped on a single loose brick, leaving him confused about why such a large boulder had suddenly appeared. Kalina, in contrast, handled the situation calmly and shattered the boulder into fragments with a single sword strike. She asked whether Yuda was unharmed, and Yuda felt relieved upon confirming that Kalina was safe. Kalina then asked where the others were and questioned the nature of the place they had been transported to. Yuda explained that it appeared to be a dungeon created by the Demon King, a revelation that surprised Kalina. Yuda asked whether Kalina was unfamiliar with dungeons, adding that such structures were common in game-like worlds. He explained that a dungeon typically resembled a maze, with monsters and traps distributed randomly throughout the area. Kalina agreed that the place was indeed maze-like in structure, noting that she had attempted to take several different paths, but consistently ended up returning to the same location. Kalina asked Yuda how they were supposed to escape from the place, and Yuda replied with a serious expression that their first priority was locating Asura and Evan. He added that Asura would likely have a method to break through such a contrived mechanism. At that moment, Asura was seen swinging his fist and demolishing a wall. Witnessing this, Evan was shocked by the man's overwhelming brute strength and unconventional approach to problem solving. Evan shouted in frustration, reminding Asura that he had been instructed not to smash everything indiscriminately, since Asura's actions were making it even harder for them to locate the correct path. Asura dismissed Evan's command, warning him not to attempt ordering Asura around, and labeling Evan a pathetic individual who spoke more than he acted. After making that statement, Asura walked away, declaring that he would find his own route independently. Exhausted, Evan conceded and told Asura to do whatever he wished, noting internally that even if Asura continued smashing walls, he would eventually end up returning to the starting location. Evan then turned his attention to a small green container, reflecting that Belzer had prepared the dungeon carefully, to the point that even the pathfinding tool he possessed was unable to detect a viable route. Sitting on the ground, Evan wondered whether this attempt would also end in failure, feeling that they were still far from reaching the Demon King and that approaching the Demon King's castle remained extremely difficult each time. Evan changed his tone and stated that if the situation remained unchanged, returning to the kingdom would be impossible. Nova suddenly interrupted and asked why he had not disclosed this earlier, pointing out that there was another successor within the tower besides him. Evan pretended not to understand what Nova meant, but Nova warned him not to feign ignorance. She explained that Demon King Belzer was clearly a player like Evan and that she could sense successor-level power from him as well. Evan smiled and called Nova an interesting child before finally admitting that she was correct, acknowledging that there were two successors within the tower. He explained that when he first received the successor's power, another player had been present with him at the summit of the tower. Nova asked whether that other player was Belzer, and Evan confirmed that it was true. He revealed that they had believed the tower was cleared when the two of them combined their strength, but it appeared that this interpretation was incorrect from Eshua's perspective. Because of this, the successor's power had been divided into two halves, which eventually separated into different factions, one assigned to the human realm and the other to the demon realm. Nova questioned why Evan had promised to give them his successor's power, if that was the case. Evan responded that it had not been a lie, since incomplete successor power could still be manifested to some extent. Moreover, He had never been interested in becoming the tower's successor. With a menacing expression, Evan stated that his only true goal was the death of Demon King Belzer. Nova was horrified upon seeing the look on Evan's face. Evan then stood up and remarked that the explanation had become unnecessarily lengthy and told Nova not to dwell on it too deeply. He instructed Nova that they should resume searching for the correct path through the dungeon. But at that moment, Asura reappeared in front of the two. Upon seeing Asura again, Evan complained that Asura rarely listened and reminded him that he had expected Asura to return to that location anyway. Evan explained that escaping the dungeon first required determining their exact location, but Asura interrupted him mid-sentence, dismissing his explanation as nonsense and instructing him to simply follow. Asura then stated with a serious expression that he had already discovered a way out of the place, a revelation that surprised both Nova and Evan. Moments later, in another location, Graydon was seen concentrating intensely. Opening his eyes, he wondered whether the heroes had successfully escaped the maze. If they had done so, he concluded that he would have to handle the situation personally.